Hello, fellow Sublime Text fanatics. If you watch the stream, I promised that I was going to, I'll double salute in the devlog. What is up? What has been happening in the land of remote build systems and network connections? Well, let's get you all caught up. First of all, I didn't really do anything much today prior to the stream, except for research into some things. And what were the things that I researched? The things that I mentioned yesterday through the stream, and I believe in the devlog as well, which was if you in the del method in a class, is it safe to call uh, instance methods on that object in the class? And I was unable to find one way or the other whether or not that is actually safe. So I decided to leave well enough alone and not actually do that. And there was something else that I looked up, which is escaping me at the moment. I can't exactly remember what it was. But what I did do was I decided in order to test the network code better, we don't want to be having Sublime run it every time we save it. So I spun it off into its own directory and made a copy of it, and we're working on it in there, and then we'll bring it back into the other one and delete those files when we're done. So there was a little bit of work done setting that up. And then the stream proper happened. And basically what we did was decide that since it's not necessarily safe, or at least nothing that I've been able to find. I just remembered what the other thing I researched was, by the way. We'll talk about that in just a second. Um, because we don't know if it's safe to call like self.close in Dell, I decided that we should swap around the life cycle and the life points for a connection. So previously, the connection manager, when you called connect, would just create a new connection instance and return it back. And that connection instance would create its own socket and store that internally, and then it would try to close that itself. Well, if it's not safe to call close when the object is destructed, something else should call it. And I don't know if I'm using the correct pattern here or not, but I decided that since it's the connection manager's job to create the connections and essentially close the connections, let's make it actually responsible for creating the socket and destroying the socket. Because of the other thing that I researched today, I do this a lot. Have you noticed that? I talk with my hands, but I really like to throw the rock horns, and I'm not even that much of a rock man. Yeah. Um, the other thing that I researched today, oh man, it fell out of my head because I did the rock thing. Was if you have a list of items, what's the best way to find an item inside the list by its identity or its ID, if you will, and not just by equality? I spent a bunch of time seeing if there was an easy way to do that. Generally, because the connection manager needs a way to get rid of an object, and in order to do that, it has to lock the connection list and then find exactly the connection you specified in that list of connections so it can close it, right? You don't want to just say if the host is the same and the port is the same, because there could be multiple connections to the same place. So since that needs to do two things, it needs to be able to close a one. My dog is under the desk. It needs to be able to close one single connection, and it also needs to be able to close all connections when you shut down the connection manager. We abstract a new method in the speed refactor, I should say, not abstract, a connection method in the connection manager whose job it is to close down one particular connection by shutting down the socket and setting the instance to none. And then there was a couple of extra helpers in there, one to remove one connection and one to remove all connections, and it can just call into that one thing. So now the connection object itself, when you call close, it just goes back to the connection manager and says, hey, get rid of me. And the connection manager takes care of that. And similarly, when you call shutdown on the connection manager, it can just throw away all connections. And we changed that a little bit. That's why we moved the creation of the socket out of connection into connection manager, because the connection manager has to be responsible for closing the sockets because it's definitely there at the time the connection goes away. Um, so it should probably be creating them too, just to keep things orthogonal. Now, once that was out of the way, we actually got in on and created some network code. So what we did was create the network thread to actually introspect the list of connections and iterate over all the ones that are going to be readable, which is every connection all the time, because no matter what, you always want to know when the connection is readable. And for connections that are writable, when is a connection writable? When it has more than one message queued to send, when it has no messages queued to send, but it's currently sending a message and it hasn't completed yet, and the third case, which is when a connection completes. So let's just cover that for just a second. When the connection is created, we make the socket be non-blocking, and then we call connect on it. Now the connection is happening in the background. The connect call returns before the connection has completed. So in order to know when the connection is fully connected and ready to go, or has experienced an error, one of those two things, what you have to do is, or what we're doing anyway, you don't have to do this. You could just sit in a tight while one loop spamming the hell out of the API. We use select, and select for that socket when it's writable. And when a socket that's pending connect is writable, you know that it could have just finished connecting one way or the other. It's either success or failure, and you have to ask the object about underlying connection failures. Uh, you ask it for if there's a socket error, and it'll say yes, there was an error, or no, there wasn't. If there wasn't, it's connected. If there was an error, there is, which means the connection has to have a Boolean in it that knows whether it's connected or not, so that when you it selects for writability and the write method is called, it knows to check to see if it's actually connected or not, and it'll close itself if it didn't connect, but otherwise it continues forward, um, and can actually read some data. And that means that when you ask a connection if it's writable, it's also in the list, not only when there's something to send, but also when it doesn't know if it's connected yet. Um, And with that out of the way, we implemented a send and a receive. So our test program actually allows you to call connection manager startup, make a connection, put a message into it, and then call receive and get the message out. And we just connected to the local echo server, which echoes back every byte that you send it. So we can successfully send a message and receive it. So through the system, although there's still a lot of error handling to happen, we have verified that we can transmit data, we can receive data, and we can decode that data back into a message, which is the fundamentals of our network system. So going on into tomorrow, when this devlog is done, I'm gonna get it ready to upload and then go and commit code. Um, but the job for tomorrow then becomes enhancing that send code and enhancing that read code in a couple of important ways. First of all, right now the send code is just calling send once on a message and assuming the whole thing got across, which is not safe. You need to check that return value. Secondly, the send should be sending a 4-byte prefix for how long the message it's about to send is, so that the receiving code knows when it's got all of the data. That's not happening. That's pretty easy to do, though. I actually could have worked on that tonight, but we were running a little late on the stream. Secondly, in the reception code, needs to be smarter as well. We first need to read 4 bytes. Well, we want to read as much as we can off the socket, but we need to pull 4 bytes of it out to be the packet length, and then that many bytes more have to come, and we have to keep accumulating that into a buffer until we know that we've received all of the data. And when we've received all of the data, only then can we go ahead and push that message into the receive queue for the other end to see. Now, once that's done, which we're going to be able to test by making sure that we only ever send 1 byte at a time, which means we'll only ever receive 1 byte at a time, and we'll be able to verify that our partial sends and partial receives work. We also need to get notifications in play, which is going to be a slightly different system since it's not in Sublime yet. We're not going to be able to do the thing we normally would do. We might just print a message to say that we would raise a notification without actually doing it. That'll tell us that it's actually doing the right thing at the right time. We also need to probably add some more error checking in there as well, which is going to come when we do the read and the write code, because right now it's very bare bones. But we are making excellent progress, and I think maybe tomorrow might see the end of the core code for the client, and we can start the perhaps arduous journey of trying to implement a similar action in the C sharp code, which I have to admit kind of has me a little bit worried because I'm not particularly used to working with network code in C sharp. So we'll see what happens. But this has actually been a longer devlog than normal, so I think might not be after I clip off the part at the beginning, but nevertheless, that is it for this Devember day, November the 15th. I'm ODAT Nerd. You've been watching the devlog. Subscribe if you want to see more of them and see the package when it's eventually done, if it works. We'll learn something along the way. Maybe we'll decide this design is crap. Who knows? The only way to find out is to keep on chugging on and learning. So go Devember and stay sublime, my friends. Stay sublime.